So, yeah. Yeah, don't forget. Yeah, questions. Is this working? Yeah, it is. Yeah, invent your questions as we go along, and not just about what I'm going to say now, but anything I said earlier. Indeed, anything anyone else has said. And as Andy said, Andy Matheson and Graham Mungine will come and join me a little bit later, and we aim to get through by 9:15. So. Great. By the way, I want to remind you that tomorrow morning in the coffee break, the tea time, there's a meeting for everybody who's involved in Stop the Traffic already and in trafficking issues, or any country or anybody that like to get involved or like to know how to connect and like to know about the projects, like to know more. So there's a 3/4 of an hour coffee break, so there's time to grab a coffee. We'll say all this again tomorrow morning, come back here, and then there's going to be a presentation about how we drive this forward internationally together. I just came back from talking to the United Nations the day before I came here, actually, and there are a huge new raft of opportunities opening up for us if we can grasp them. So we'll talk about that a bit later. Now, the other day, yesterday indeed, I was talking about the big story, and what I'd like to do now, it says in the programme that I'm going to talk about the next 25 years, which may sound as though, on initial reading, as though I'm going to explain where Oasis will be in 25 years' time, because I've got some kind of crystal ball and I can just gaze into it and I know exactly what's going to be happening a quarter of a century from now. What we are going to do is we're going to look at the big story and the future. We looked at the big story, we're going to look at the big story and the future together. You'll remember that I talked about the fact that what we believe impacts the way we behave all the time. What we believe impacts the way we behave. That's not to say that we don't get it wrong. What we believe can be sometimes different from the way we behave, can't it? We all do miserable things that we're not proud of. Sometimes we do them by design, sometimes we do them by mistake. But there's a big gap between what we believe and who we are. But the reality is that our big story drives us forward. I was joking with Jerry earlier today, and we were remembering last time we met in Goa, and on the, I think it was the last day, for some reason we had loads and loads and loads and loads of balloons, and they were blown up and they were all put together, and at the end of this thing that we were doing, we had to stamp on them all and pop them all. And Jerry, being the kind of guy he is, volunteered to do this in quite a spectacular way. There were just a giant heap of balloons on the floor, and he kind of threw himself off a stage in a kind of, belly flop thing. He threw himself off the stage onto this bed of balloons, so they cushioned him, and he popped them all on the way down. The problem was that the weight of Jerry flying through the air dispersed all the balloons way before he landed, and he landed splat on the floor. It was the most hilarious thing to watch, really. And do you remember that, Jerry?
I knew that well, my back still.
It was an incredible thing, because the plausibility structure that Jerry trusted in was a false one, and it didn't really work. When we put our trust in the wrong story, it all falls apart. I'd like to go back to this quote. The kind of thinking that will solve the world's problems will be of a different order to the kind of thinking that created those problems in the first place, Albert Einstein says. So tomorrow can't be the same as yesterday, otherwise we just go back round in a circle and end up where we are. We have to imagine things being different. Those of you who listen to me speak very often will know that I constantly talk about the fact, another quote from Albert Einstein actually, he said that it's impossible to achieve what you can't first imagine. If the church that you're part of can only imagine that its world is this big, its world will only ever be this big. But if your church can imagine that its sphere of influence is this big, it can grow out into that. If your church believes it only does these things, it will only ever do those things, no matter how well it's led, because it's created a boundary, but the boundary is in its mind and understanding. It's limited by its own worldview, its own meta-narrative, its own plausibility structure. But if you can think outside of that, all sorts of things become possible. Everything that happens is invented twice. It's invented once in the mind of the inventor. Bach first wrote in his head, and then he puts it on paper. Picasso first designs in his head, and then it goes down on paper. A great novelist first imagines the plot, and then painstakingly establishes it chapter by chapter on their word processor or by whatever method or means. Everything is first created in the mind of the one who imagines. Oasis will be limited to what our imagination limits it to. If we say Oasis does this because our theology tells us we do this, we will do that. If we say our theology allows us to do these things, actually we can begin to step into it. I often say, I know it myself only all too well, I know it today really painfully, that being visionary is it's almost like a disease you can't get rid of. It's an illness, do you know? It's an illness. And you live with this agony, torn between what you know you must do and the struggle to do it and the pain of doing it and the cost of doing it and the misunderstanding you normally incur as you do it. Being an entrepreneur is it's an illness, and there is no cure. But actually, unless we imagine, we will always live inside a limited world. Those who imagine will always die without their dreams fulfilled. But actually, they would have got a lot further than those who never stopped and began to imagine a future that was different. Does that all make sense to you? I ought to go on. Ah, yeah, I know that. I was hoping to have a little kind of. Well, there's no way of printing off PowerPoints here, you see, so I can't tell what's coming. So it's as much of a surprise to me as it is to you, to tell you the truth. I did it this afternoon. My memory's so short, I can't remember what's happening. I've just had a look at it and I've forgotten again. There you are. Yeah. Back last summer in the UK, so that's the summer in the UK is about July the 2nd to about July the 6th. It's kind of a very short summer period we have, normally interrupted in the middle by a belt of rain. And anyway, there were 1 or 2 sunny days, and Connie and I took our niece, who lives in America, who came to England for the first time, on a trip on a London tour bus. Do you know, like most cities, they have those big open-air buses, and you get on, then you put some headphones on, and you get a commentary of all the kind of landmark buildings as you go round. Now, I was born in London, have lived in London most of my life, and have never been on one of these buses. So Connie and I, and one of our daughters, Abigail, and our niece, Stephanie, we got on this bus. And we paid a fortune for it, and off we went driving around London. Now, I know London like the back of my hand, and so we're driving along what's called the South Bank of the Thames, which is where we started, upstairs on this bus. It was a hot, boiling day, actually, which was a miracle, and we reached the Big Ben clock. Do you know, you all know the big clock at the British Parliament. And I'd got my headphones tuned in, and you could choose, Italian or Spanish or German or, all these kind of things. But I'd chosen English because it's the only language I speak. And I was listening to this thing, and we reached this clock, the Big Ben. And this is what my commentator said. This was his first little introduction. He said, "I am the ghost of Jack. I lived in London 300 years ago and have haunted the city ever since. We are now at a big clock. It is called Big Ben. Big Ben is a big clock." And then he stopped. And I said to Connie and Stephanie and Abigail, her daughter, I said, this is rubbish. This is rubbish, because I know the clock's not called Big Ben at all. That's the name of the bell. It's called St Stephen's Tower. And I know lots about, you know, all sorts. I can tell you when it was built and how much time it gains in a year and all the rest of it and how they correct the time and all this kind of thing. But all he'd said was wrong, and he told me that it was a big clock, which I could tell anyway just from looking at it. So I said, this is rubbish. Anyway, we drove on, and you go round Parliament, and then we went up to Buckingham Palace, where the Queen lives, and etc. And every time we got to some big building, Jack piped up again and said, I am the ghost of Jack. We are now at Buckingham Palace, the home of the Queen. And I'm thinking, and then he stops, and I think, this is absolute pants, this stuff. I cannot believe how bad this is and how much it's cost us. Anyway, because the London traffic is bad, we were on this bus for 3 hours, right? 3 hours with this inane commentary going on and on and on and on. Anyway, about 2 3/4 hours later, perhaps 2.5 hours later, we got to what's called Hyde Park. Hyde Park is a huge open expanse in the middle of London, and besides anything else, you can rollerblade there and skateboard there. But that's not the important bit. There's Speaker's Corner, where they used to take people, because we believe in democracy, we used to give them the chance to stand up and make a speech before we hanged them. It was an amazing thing, you know. Speak now, and then... And then you get to Tyburn, which, well, it's not there anymore. Tyburn, by Speaker's Corner, and they used to drag people in the carts down the road from Tyburn, where the prison was, and take them to Speaker's Corner, and they used to put them on the wagon. In the UK, we have a saying about alcohol. It's called one for the road. And it's because when they used to take these people to hang them, they used to give them a really potent drink of alcohol because it made them more flexible and easier to hang. That's what one for the road is. And I know all of this stuff. So we get to Hyde Park, and Jack goes, I am the ghost of Jack. I've haunted... Yeah, I know you've haunted London for a long time. And then he says, Hyde Park, a great place to skateboard. At which point I said to Connie and Stephanie and Abigail, I said, this really is rubbish. And they all said, shh, shh. And I said, what do you mean? Shh! He's not saying anything. And then Stephanie said, he's just explaining about Tyburn, and he's explaining about the Speaker's Corner and how they used to bring people down the road and they used to give them a drink, one for the road. And it was at that point that I realised I'd spent the last 2 3/4 hours listening to the commentary for the under 8-year-olds. It's honestly true. The thing in life, you see, is that you can reject a big story because you've been fed the wrong version of it. You reject a big story because you say it's childish. You reject a big story because you say it doesn't make sense. You reject a meta-narrative, a plausibility structure, because it doesn't seem to hang together. But the reason it doesn't seem to hang together is actually because you only ever bought the infant's version of the thing. A childish, immature, juvenile version of the truth, which you then reject as though it was the real thing in the first place. Endless numbers of people have done that with a meta-narrative which I live my life by, which is the life, the example, an example of Christ. I am a Christian. A Christian is someone who is a follower of Christ. That means, effectively, that what I do is I seek to see the world through the lens of Christ. Remember, I said we all wear sunglasses on the inside of our heads, which tint the world for us, but we can't take them off and have a look round. Actually, the lens through which I want to see the world is the lens of Christ and his teaching and his understanding. But the problem is, I need to move from a juvenile understanding, a Sunday school, or even worse than that, understanding of all of this stuff, which doesn't add up, doesn't make sense, doesn't stack up in a 21st century world, and doesn't work with science, and seems also ridiculous, and this God of anger and wrath who's cursing, abusing people, and all the rest of it. And so people end up rejecting the story because they've not actually looked through the lens of Christ to see something. They reject the juvenile instead of ever trying the real thing. But it's the real thing, that big story, that meta-narrative, that plausibility structure that guides Oasis. As we say, I was saying the other day, that's what we believe. That leads to the way we behave. The way we behave is the outcome of what we believe. That doesn't mean that everybody who works with us or we work for and we serve is going to buy into the centre of our meta-narrative. They may only buy in because they love the results. They may only buy in because they like the behaviours. They may only buy in because they love what it does in a community. But actually, the fact that it's fueled and driven by this huge reservoir of resource is vitally important, because once the behaviour becomes detached from the belief, actually we're headed for the rocks in the long term. And the reason for that is this, as I'll explain a little bit more as we go through. The world keeps changing. And because the world keeps changing, you can't plan tomorrow and the next 25 years by what we did yesterday or last year. We have to reinvent ourselves. We're going to hit situations we can't even dream of yet. Technology is going to develop in ways we'll never understand. I was telling Chantal earlier that when Oasis started 25 years ago, Connie and I, we had two very young children, and when Oasis started, it cost £1,600, I remember. It was really expensive, a computer. Windows didn't exist. There was no Microsoft. I bought this first ever computer. It was giant, to write the first ever book I wrote on, and we kept it at home, and it ran off DOS. Some of you will know what DOS is. DOS drives Windows anyway. But Bill Gates was in college, I think, you know, and there was no Windows and the internet. No one had the foggiest idea what that even meant. It just didn't exist, and you couldn't word process, and there were no fax machines, and there were no mobile phones. None of that existed when Oasis started. An extraordinary thing. I remember going to India, just before Oasis, India began. I went to India and spent some time, then was there for 3.5 weeks, which is the longest time I've ever spent away from home. And I've phoned Cornelia once in 3.5 weeks. And I had to queue up for about 4 hours at a little booth and just to make the phone call. It's an extraordinary thing, isn't it, where we can text each other. The world's changed. It's extraordinary. But here's the thing we do know, it will change more in the next 25 years than it did do in the last 25 years. So how can you stand here and say, we'll be here in 25 years? None of us can even imagine what's going to happen to a computer or the internet just for beginnings in the next 10 years, let alone anything else. So what guides us? What guides us is our map. What guides us is our story. What guides us is constantly grappling with our story. There was, in Kenya this happened, a friend of mine went to lecture there. He's a theologian. And he went and he spoke, well, I said we're all theologians, but he's a professional one, if you see what I mean. So he showed up. He showed up in this university, theological seminary actually, in Kenya, in Nairobi, and he was giving a talk. And it was all about how we have to search for Jesus all the time. And this Kenyan student stood up and he said to my friend, he said, you may have to search for Jesus, we don't. You Europeans might have to search for Jesus, but that's because you lost him in the first place. We never lost him, we don't need to search for him. And everybody applauded. And my friend stood and he said this. He said, I understand what you mean, but let me ask you this question. Do you know everything there is to know about Jesus? Have you got him summed up and buttoned down? And the response came back, no. Well, he said, you must join me in pursuing Jesus and searching for him. Because whilst we admit that there's still so much that's unknown, we have to search. Because it's only an arrogance that allows us to say we know. Life is a journey and theology is an art. I'll explain that in a minute. Some people have turned theology into a full stop. These are the things you have to believe. This is the box. You better tick all this stuff because it's always true. Actually, our imaginations must allow us to do something bigger. Does that make sense? Theology actually is an art, not a science. When you learn maths at school, you learn it as a science, don't you? 2 and 2 makes 4, 3 and 3 makes 6, etc., etc. Maths is a science. It's rigid. It's always the same. If you talk to Stephen Hawking, or if you could talk to Albert Einstein, Einstein would say, that's your problem. Maths isn't a science. It's not rigid. It's an art. It's expanding, and it's changing. Think outside the box. Imagine new things. Theology is an art as well. It's not a science. It's not do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. It's look at the whole world through the lens of Jesus, this big story, and explore it. And all the opportunities that come our way and all the challenges that come our way, see them through the eyes of Christ. Get so inside this big story that you feel it and it becomes your guide for the future. That's the only hope for Oasis. It really is the only hope for us, which is why we have to do theology well, all of us. Theology and sociology and philosophy. I always wonder what the difference is between the two. People say, you know, the three. People say, oh, I'm a sociologist, I'm a theologian, I'm a philosopher. Actually, it's all about life. It's the big story of life, and we've got to do that. We've got to do it well. So, I'd like to introduce you to these three terms. Some of you will know them. Christology, missiology, and ecclesiology. That's enough to put you to sleep instantly, right? And what I'd like, what this really says is our Christology must drive our missiology, and our missiology must inform our ecclesiology. Christology drives missiology. Missiology must inform our ecclesiology. And I know that's probably, some of you go, oh yeah, that's obvious. And some of you say, I've heard Steve say that before. The point is to say again what we've said before, because if it was important then, it's important now. If you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. We'll find out in the next few minutes. Christology is simply our understanding, our theory, our theology of Christ. Theology is our science, our understanding of God. Christology is our understanding of Jesus. And because we're a Christian organisation, we're seeing the whole world through this lens of Jesus. I ought to tell you, this honestly true, over these last 3 years, I think it is, I have now held this position where I am known as the United Nations Special Advisor on Community Action Against People Trafficking. To be a special advisor to the UN, everybody goes, woo, you know, and all that kind of thing. I have to tell you this, and there are others of you who work with the UN on me, with me on this. If you learn nothing else from being part of the UN, you learn this. I'll tell you this for everything I'm worth, with all my heart. I learn again that the things that Jesus said are so profound that if the 193 countries in the world could actually get hold of it, go the other mile, turn the other cheek, let those who lead serve, let those who want to lead most serve all. If only we could get hold of that. Don't take the blow, don't return the blow. Don't retaliate. Pray for those who persecute you. Lay down your lives for them. If the world could simply come to terms with that, or even articulate it as a way forward, it would be a completely different global community in which we live. It's not that they can't do it, it's that they don't even know it needs to be done. Jesus said, go the other mile, turn the other cheek. He didn't say, he who's got the most missiles wins. But we still think that. It's a massive reformation that's needed. So from my experience of the UN, I've learned that this big story stacks up at any level. I often say to people, actually, even if you don't believe that God exists, it still makes more sense, this, than anything else I've ever heard anybody else say, ever. Christology, our understanding of Christ. And our understanding of Christ must drive our missiology, which is our understanding of our mission. That's what will keep us safe over the next 25 years. If everything we know about Christ drives everything we do in terms of our mission, if we keep on evaluating where we're going, what we're doing, in the light of our understanding of who Jesus is, even though the world throws up all sorts of new situations for us and moral dilemmas we can't even imagine at the moment, actually that will keep us true. Once we turn away from looking at things through the lens of Christ, we get mashed up and messed up on our mission. Ecclesiology is our understanding of the nature and the role of the church. Ecclesia is the Greek name for church. You know, it's the word, and so ecclesiology. Our Christology, everything we know about Jesus Christ, should drive everything we do in terms of our mission and our understanding of what we're about. And our mission and everything we understand about what we're doing should drive our whole understanding of the shape and the size and the interaction and the depth and the breadth of the way the church is. If that makes sense. There's a picture of Jesus. I don't know if you recognise him. That's from 1977, Jesus of Nazareth, and that is... Yeah, and at the moment he's come down in the world a bit. He's no longer Jesus. Is he on Holby City? Yeah, he's a doctor on Holby City. If you don't live in the UK, you don't know what Holby City is, but it's a long-running soap about Holby City Hospital, and he's now a consultant. He's at the top. He's a consultant on Holby City, but he is no longer Jesus. So that's a massive step down for him, isn't it, Robert Powell? And he's aged rather a lot as well. You'd hardly recognise him. But that became a very famous image of Jesus in the 70s, because the film Jesus of Nazareth, actually, which came out a long time before most people here were born, except Graham and Ricky and myself, and you know, kind of one or two others, that was a massively popular film. Here's another image of Jesus. This is 3rd century, and it was found in Egypt, and that's what Jesus looked like, the image of Jesus. Here's another one. Do you know what that one is? The Turin Shroud, which many people believe is actually the shroud that was laid over Jesus, and so this is an impression of what he really looked like, and other people reckon it's a forgery made in the 1200s sometime. So, an image of Jesus. Do you know what that is? In 2001, the BBC made a series of documentary films called Jesus of Nazareth. And what they did, their scientists went to the area where Jesus lived. They took lots of skulls of Jews who had died from that period, and they pieced together what they think, on the scientific evidence that they had, Jesus actually looked like. And that's the artist impression built on the science of what Jesus looked like. 2001. This is an Eastern Jesus. It's from a Hindi origin, actually, where Jesus is held in high esteem as a wonderful prophet. And this is how that artist pictured Jesus. Here's a very, very famous one. This was painted in the 9th century. Picture of Jesus. Here's one that's based on the Turin Shroud, and it's just made up of barcodes. You can probably see it better from where you are, from where I am. It's a Jesus for the 21st century. This is Holman Hunt's painting, or at least the top of it, 19th century artist. When Holman Hunt painted this picture of Jesus standing at the door knocking, you know, that's just, there he is. It toured the whole of Europe and became this phenomenal success everywhere. The face of Jesus standing, knocking. This is from South America, the laughing Jesus. It comes from Brazil and comes out of the favelas. The Jesus full of joy and on the side of those who have nothing. This was found in a cave and dates right back to the 2nd century, about 150 years after Jesus had lived. The Alpha and the Omega. And this, in the year 1999, I think, oh no, 1989, was an advertising campaign in Britain. It's harder to see, but along the bottom it says, "Meek, mild, as if. Discover the real Jesus. Church, April the 4th. It was done for Easter, and it was on buses and holdings right around the UK. What image of Jesus do we have? Who is this Jesus? Because the more we look at him, the better we get at what we're doing for the next 25 years. If we want to do what we're doing well, we need to pursue Jesus, and we need to debate and ask questions with all our energy. And there must be no question that's off limits. No question. There must be no question like there's a dogma and I have to believe that. Every question must be opened. Every can must be opened. Every question must be explored. Because unless it's explored, actually we can't know Jesus as he is, and we'll never get to grips with our big story in a mature way, and we'll end up rejecting it, but it will be the under 8s version that we rejected rather than the grown-up version. I'd like to show you a little film. Here we go. This is about, oh yeah, we need to put some sound in.
Okay.
All right. Yeah.
Just
It's in.
put this
Yeah.
up before-
Ready? Here we go. This is about how you decide what you really believe in. Whoops. No, it's not.
I've been on a kind of spiritual quest for a while now. I've had many suggestions from the good people of the internet regarding which religion I should adhere to. But I had no idea there were so many belief systems out there. It's quite overwhelming. And with this many, it's virtually impossible to choose. So I've decided to carry on via a process of elimination. The method is quite scientific, I think. First of all, I'm throwing out all the religions I've never heard of, and then all those that I can't be bothered to research. I'm also eliminating religions that have more than one God, because I'd never be able to remember all their names and what they do. I'm hopeless at that, and it would be embarrassing. So those are gone. And next, I'm getting rid of any religion that doesn't actively try to recruit new converts, because well, if they're not going to make the effort, then neither am I. And what I'm left with, surprisingly, is Christianity and Islam, the two loudest religions in the world, and the two most popular. They're a sort of spiritual equivalent of the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in the 1960s, except with a worse sense of rhythm and less exciting parties. But they're what I've got to choose from. So I've made a chart comparing the two, and I hope this is going to help me decide between them. I'll talk you through it. We've got first the promise of eternal life in heaven. Both of them do that. The threat of eternal damnation in hell. Again, equally scary, the two. Only one God. Islam, yes, definitely. Christianity, yes, but at the same time, no. You do get one God, but he comes in three different designs. You've got the jealous father God, very interested in smiting and justice. Then you've got the Son, who's mainly about love and forgiveness, although he has got a dark side. And finally, you've got the Holy Spirit, who's very mysterious and looks like a pigeon. But according to Christians I've spoken to, they are all one being, so that's a in the one God column. Moving on. Hatred of homosexuality, no disagreement there. Women inferior to men, again, both religions on the same page with that one. Are you allowed to eat bacon? An important question. Islam, no, And Christianity, also strictly no, but you can really. It depends if you favour the words of Jesus or the words of Paul. Most Christians seem to go with the latter, which is odd because you think Jesus would outrank Paul, but apparently not. And the last item on my list is this question. Are you allowed multiple wives? In Islam, yes you are. Christianity, no you're not. So it's still very hard to choose. I thought it was getting easier when I found out that Islam is the one true religion. And that really would have clinched it. But then I found out that Christianity is as well. So I started to think that maybe I should try a more practical approach to making a decision. And I had a look on Google Maps, and I found out that from my house, the nearest mosque is 2.5 miles away, whereas there's a church at the end of the street. So that's that, I think. I'll be a Christian, if I ever get round to it. Cheers.
There you go. Right. Right. Oh.
I've been...
Oh, sorry. There he goes again. Right. It's really interesting, isn't it? And besides being funny, you know, it's that I'll be a Christian. And as I was saying yesterday, people say, I'm a Christian. But the question is, what is the content of that? I'm a Christian and I have this view and that view. But what is the content? When I grew up, my dad and the church I went to, they taught me that Christianity and politics didn't mix. And that you ought to keep politics out of the pulpit. And we moved on from there, even in Britain. And we realised that politics and Christian faith really do mix and must mix. What doesn't mix is Christianity and apathy. That's what doesn't mix. But having got to this new place where we say Christianity and politics do mix, we say, right, let's be political. But the point was that Jesus was a particular kind of political. It's not like Christians ought to be political, so be anything you like as long as you're political. It's who was Jesus? What were his ethics? What's the big story? What are we about? Because only that is going to guide us. Our Christology must determine our missiology. Our missiology must determine our ecclesiology. In other words, to say it again, everything we believe, our beliefs lead to our behaviours. Everything we believe about Jesus, and we must debate Jesus passionately. On the first day, Andy was saying that there were more and more people writing in Oasis, which I think is fantastic. The more we write, the more we debate, the more we think out loud, the more we globally have a conversation, the stronger we will be. So I think that's fantastic. Our Christology must drive our missiology, our responses in every circumstance. The academies in the UK, you all know what the morning after pill is. Do you give out the morning after pill or don't you give out the morning after pill? Now, if I said to my dad, you know, I'm running this organisation, Dad, and should we give out the morning after pill? I think he would have just, I mean, that would be the end of my life, probably, just the asking of the question. But we have to ask the question. And the reality is, of course, that if you don't give out the morning after pill in the UK context, this girl's going to go and get it somewhere else. The availability is there. But of course, if you engage in the process, you engage pastorally with that person, and you begin to build a moral and pastoral framework back into this person's life. Whereas walking away from it, you leave them marooned on a desert island to fend for themselves and nowhere. So, we have to think, always. It's funny, isn't it, that when that he was going through, he said, I asked these questions, are you allowed to eat bacon, and is there only one God? Then there was that question, view on homosexuality, and then he said, no problem there. Both believe they're going to burn in hell or whatever, and not much response. When he said, what about women? And then he said, no problem there. Both religions believe that women are inferior to men. Some of you went, ooh. No noise for the persecuted homosexual. Quite a lot to say about the woman who doesn't feel she's in the right place. So this Jesus comes to challenge us all the time, doesn't he? And pose these huge questions. And the one I've just posed is obviously a giant question for everyone in this room because of the kind of people that we're involved with and the kind of communities we're in and the pastoral responsibility we have for everyone that we're working with. I stand here in front of you, beside whatever else I do, I am the Chief Executive Officer of all of the academies that Oasis UK runs. I am the Chief Executive Officer. We have north of 10,000 students, all exploring sexuality. We're not pushing anyone. We're really not pushing anyone. But all growing and exploring sexuality. What is my Christ-given responsibility? I've wrestled with that. I've thought it through. Here is what I believe it is. I believe that every young person in our charge, in our care, must grow to feel safe and comfortable in their own skin. And I know so many young people who felt dirty and persecuted and guilty for just being who they are and thinking what they think and feeling what they feel. I believe that as I look at the big picture of who Jesus is, I cannot be responsible for an organisation, a movement that creates that kind of deep guilt inside people and a culture where some people are dismissed because of what they are. That opens up a debate, doesn't it? But that's what we've got to do. We've got to debate. We have to question. But if anyone's sitting here thinking, oh no, you can't ask that question, then we're in trouble. We're really in trouble over the next 25 years because we have to discuss, and our mission must grow out of our view of who Jesus is as we debate all these big questions. It'd be nice, wouldn't it, in a world where there were no big questions to debate, we'd all just, just go on safaris every day, and jolly along. We live in a tough world, and we live in a world where we're charged to bring truth and grace, demonstrate God constantly. Earlier today, I was simply saying this, that one of the things I've seen kind of recently and said recently as a guide for me with my big story is this: if it doesn't look like Jesus, it's not God. If it doesn't look like Jesus, it's not God. So whenever you see a response or an attitude or a behaviour, or you think about a policy or a plan or an approach, and you measure it this way, does it look like Jesus? Because if it doesn't look like Jesus, it can't be God. God looks like Jesus. Hence, we have to grapple with and journey with this big story that we're part of, rather than push the hard bits away. When I was a kid, I used to go to Sunday school on Sunday afternoons, actually, and I used to sit in Sunday school, and I used to think, as they read loads of stories from the Old Testament, because they're always good for teaching kids, aren't they? Those ones, So you read the story of Elijah, on Mount Carmel. I don't know if you know that one, and he calls down this fire, and it's a fantastic story for boys. It's brilliant. Well, it's a fantastic story for everyone, but I used to love that one. It was brilliant. And at the end, there are all these prophets that belong to this other god, the Baal god, and they all get sliced up and killed, 950 of them, wiped out. Which is a great end to a kind of cowboy film or James Bond film. But I remember sitting there, I must have been 8, 9, 10, because it always came out. I used to think, whoa, that's a bit violent. But nobody ever used to comment on it. So I remember as a little boy with my short trousers in my Sunday best, tartan suit I used to wear to church, because my mum had got it and made me wear it every week. And I used to think, I wonder why they don't mention that real difficult bit. And then I felt, because you always do, I thought, must be because I'm really thick. That, like, it must be obvious why God wipes out all these people. It's just I'm so thick I can't work it out. And they know it all, so they don't even bother to mention it. Then I went into a youth group. And I'd sit there, you know, ages 13, 14, 15, and they'd do all this kind of stuff again. And we'd read through all these passages with these massive genocides in. And no one, I mean, it's the only question you want to ask, isn't it? Well, I wanted to ask. And everybody asks every question except that question. And I used to think, I must be really thick. I'm the only person who's really interested in this question. And everybody else must know. And then I went to theological college and I did something which is called systematic theology. And we sat in these systematic theology classes poring over all sorts of deep stuff. And the big question about why God kept slaughtering people in the Old Testament and demanding that people were stoned to death, you know, for all sorts of things, you know, like women who wore dresses of more than 2 types of cloth, or more than 1 type of cloth, they had to be stoned for a start, you know, and men who were homosexuals and slept with each other, they had to be stoned. And yeah, the list goes on and on and on of people, you know, they're running out of people in the end because they're all being stoned. And I used to think, why is all this happening? And if the Bible says it, and we all say we believe the Bible, why don't we do it? You know, if your wife wears a dress that offends you and it's made of 2 different types of material, you know, take her outside. We'll have a little stoning ceremony later, you know, in compliance with the Levitical code. And no one ever mentioned this stuff. And I used to think, I was lectured by this guy called Dr. Bruce Milne, and I used to think, Bruce Milne must know. It's just, he doesn't realise how stupid I am, so he's not bothering to say. And then I left theological college and I became a minister, and I still didn't know, and I thought the senior minister of my church must know, he just never got round to preaching about it. And then I set up Oasis, and I thought, I'm now the leader of this whole thing, and I don't know, and I am now the person that everybody thinks must know. And then I went to tea with a guy who some of you will remember. Well, he's still alive. His name's John Stott, and he's a great theologian. And I became friends with John. And I used to sit and I used to have tea with John in London. And he was like, I mean, he was, some of you older ones who know, he's like the kind of theological thinker, evangelical theological thinker. And one day, as I was drinking tea with John Stott, just near to a church called All Souls Langham Place, I realised that John Stott didn't know. So there's this conspiracy of silence. We have to grapple with all of this. We really do. Oh, hang on. Great, okay. Now, this, my own piece of artwork here. Arnie talked a little bit about something like this the other morning. If our Christology determines our mission and how we go about it, and our mission determines the way churches are, the way the church is. And for me, you see, whether we're running hubs, you know, and we're involved in healthcare, and we're involved in, you know, running football teams, and we're involved in art classes or whatever we're doing, and we're working, you know, with people who have been trafficked and we're rescuing them. That was a fantastic film with Anita, wasn't it? Just brilliant. And we're doing all of this kind of stuff, and we're running a health clinic, and we're running a school, and all the rest of it. Well, the truth is, as far as I can see, all of this, in the end, you need to be careful how you say this, and I wouldn't say this publicly because it's not understood. But actually, they're just all elements of what church is. Because in the Bible, of course, the synagogue where Jesus went, the synagogue was the singing centre, the praying centre, it was the medical centre, it was the town hall, it was the legal advice centre, it was the Citizens Advice Bureau, it was the retirement centre, the sports centre, it was the school, it was all of those things. It was the hub of community, because life is one, as we're discovering. You haven't got a spiritual bit out there and a physical bit out there and a social bit over there. We are one person, you know, held together. And so our task is all of this stuff, and all of this stuff is the task of church. Church, of course, is simply community. So if our mission should control how we see church and what it's like. But our churches should all be like this. Here's a picture, this is an aerial view of Jesus. He's the blob in the middle, right? This is hovering above Jesus' head, right, if you see what I mean. And the circles round him are people. Because wherever Jesus went, he was a rabbi, and there were loads of people rushing down the road trying to listen to him. Rabbis taught on the move, and people always kind of trying to catch a glimpse of him and talk to him and speak to him. And in that centre, the circle nearest the centre, I can't go over there because I've got to stay with the mic. In the circle nearest the centre, there were people who, like the disciples we know, you know, like Peter and James and John, you know, they were buzzing around Jesus all the time. I guess it was hard for Jesus to get a word in edgeways sometimes with Peter, and we know that much about his character. So Peter's always chattering to Jesus, and he's always learning from him. But then there's another circle around them, and that's got more doubtful disciples in, like Thomas. You know, he wasn't ever very sure. So he's not likely to be chatter with Jesus all day. He's more likely to be in the next layer out, and he's just listening in and thinking, oh, that's interesting, and he's thinking it all over. And then he's likely to have a conversation with someone on the next layer out, and he says to someone on the next layer out, did you hear what Jesus just said to John? Isn't it funny? You know, I didn't see it that way. I'm not sure if he's right, you know, but no, come to think of it, it might be. And they get talking together. And then there's a next layer out, and they're all talking about the stuff that these lot are talking about, and sometimes telling them to shut up because they want to listen to Jesus, but they don't want to get close enough to actually have a conversation. They want to stand back, and they want to just see how it's going. And then the next layer's out. Some people turn up some days, and some people other days, and some people go, nah, it's rubbish, and some people go, no, it's good, and they start moving through the crowd, which is why there's all the gaps in the crowd. People move round the crowd, they move through the crowd. People near the centre get fed up and move out of the crowd. People at the edge move closer. That's how it operates, and that's how it actually operates. If a Christian is someone that follows Jesus, who lives life through the lens of Jesus, who's Christocentric, to use a big word, actually, if the church is that, the church has got to be porous. Our communities have to be porous. There's all sorts of people hanging around. People who don't believe, people with questions, people who did believe, people who might believe, people who once believed, people who think, I used to believe all of this, but I've really grown out of it now. It's like a tired old suit of clothes that I've grown out, and all these beliefs, I can't live with them anymore. People who are just starting on a journey, exploring questions, people who've been faithful all their life in churches and so tired of the whole thing, not because they don't believe it, because they can't go on another day with this heavy load, and they're trying to find a more peaceful life. And there's this mess that's happening around Jesus all of the time. And in our communities, it must be the same. It must be the same, because we are inclusive. Now, doesn't this look a bit like our Messio, the Oasis O? Because it's supposed to, because that's where the Oasis Messio came from. You see, it doesn't just look like it. The Oasis O is derivative of this. That's who we are. We're a big community that pulls everyone in, not pulls them in terms of dragging them against their will, but makes space for everyone with their questions, with their honest debates, with their doubts, with who they are. We accept people. Inclusion. That's who we are. And if we are that over the next 25 years, that will guide us, because that's who Jesus was, and that's the way he operated. Now, that leads us on, and I've nearly finished because we're going to have half an hour for questions. That leads us on to some big questions, which there's already been a whole load of big questions, but some big questions about some big words that we keep using. I must have heard the word inclusion mentioned at least 300 times in the last, 4 days. I was at the International Council meetings before this. So, we've got some big words that await definition. The first is inclusion. We talk about inclusion, and we said this morning, we want to include everyone. Do you know? A place where everyone can belong, which I suppose is what this picture is about. But actually, if you believe in inclusion, it poses some questions that we haven't answered, at least not in terms of our documentation. But here's the question. What do we mean by inclusion? It's a short word. There's another one we're going to talk about, peace. That's an even shorter word. There's another one, even shorter, love. These are big words of weight in definition. Now, we run into all sorts of practical problems. You know, because as we seek to include, who do we include and do we ever exclude? Can a group that's committed to including people and finding a place for everyone ever exclude someone? And you see, we don't answer that question, do we? And so because we don't answer it, you get 1,000 versions of the answer that grow up. And some are strong and some are weak. So we all know this, don't we? Actually, if you include everyone, you exclude some people because of it. Because if one person steps into the group and is included, actually their presence will exclude several others. If you're running a youth club, if you're running a football team, if you're running a class in a school, if you're working with any kind of group, you would have experienced this, wouldn't you? The behaviour of some excludes others. So if we're saying, yeah, but we've got to include her, we've got to include him, what's happening to all those who we exclude as a result? Those who say, I'm never going again, I'm dropping out of that group, I'm not going to be part of this anymore, I'm not interested. Or those who don't grow and don't develop because their learning is interrupted by the disruptive behaviour of another. So what does an inclusive agency do with all of that? Now, inclusion's a big term and everyone's talking about it. You talk to people about our inclusiveness, everybody goes, yeah, cool, sure, that's wonderful. But we've got to answer these big questions or we get nowhere. But how do you do that? How do you find a route through all this? What is our definition of inclusion? How do we really do this? I think it's all back to our big story, our plausibility structure. We are Christocentric as an organisation, even though all sorts of people choose to join us in the behaviours and not the beliefs. But when they join us in the behaviours, if we've not got what we really mean by inclusion sorted out, and we put them in a vulnerable place, and we're asking them to include everyone, yet there's someone in the room where they are who's threatening to them, then actually we're not good news. Here's what Jesus said. He said this. He said, when one of you has a complaint about another, Matthew's Gospel, take it to him and sort it out with him. And if he won't listen, bring two to sort it out. Bring a witness, fair play, justice. And if he still won't listen, take it to the whole church. Of course, Jesus only ever meant community by church. Christ-centred. A church is a Christ-centred community that's messy and has people coming and going and all the rest of it. It's Christ-centred community. If he won't listen, take it to the whole community. What Jesus was saying is this: we're inclusive, but actually we confront. And here's what you do. You don't just sit there and, oh dear, he's been a little bit disruptive, but we're inclusive. You say, we're going to do something about this. Take it to him. And if he won't listen, bring two people. And if they still won't listen, bring it to the whole community. What Jesus is saying is this: a community that wants to be inclusive will never be inclusive unless it can be confrontational. And that gives some definition to the word peace, doesn't it? A community that seeks peace can only find peace if it has the courage to confront things that fail to bring that peace. But a community that beats round it all, or a leader that beats round it all and won't confront it all, or a manager or a project leader that beats round it all, actually will never bring peace to that community because they will not confront. And so, instantly, looking at Jesus, we discover that, this begins to make sense. Even the biggest words in life, peace, love, justice, mercy, fairness, equality. What do any of those things mean? They're all gobbledygook. I know, I work for the UN. Until they find definition, and our big story, our plausibility structure, is this Jesus. Last thing, I think this is the last thing. Oh no. There you are. That's how far we are away from the end. Very close. Is this. If all this is true, this little thing I often say, I say it to everyone, you win looking like you're losing. Jesus said, you can afford to turn the other cheek. You can afford to take the blow and not return it. You can afford to do all these things because you win looking like you're losing. And for me, the cross, whatever else it is the most massive demonstration of turning the other cheek and going the extra mile. It's the full outworking of all of that. And they crucified Jesus, and he is risen from the dead. And it's as though he says, you can trust me. You can come this way. You can take the blow and not return the blow. And you will win. I was reading the words of Desmond Tutu just yesterday. A man who truly has understood that principle with his life. You can take the blow and not return it. We will not, he said, in this country, fight them in the way they fight us. We will not give them that dignity. He said in this country, many of you will know this better than me, he said, we will win. And in the moment of winning, we want to be proud of the behaviours we adopted on the way to winning. We do not want to fight as others fight us. You win looking like you're losing. Here's a man bathed in this big story who understands it and responds to it when other voices in the anti-apartheid movement were saying very different things, sometimes very violent things. Tutu kept saying, no, there is a different way. There is a different way. Over the next 25 years, are we going to receive some blows? Is it going to be hard? Are you going to struggle in your countries? Will there be people and forces that work against you? Yes, there will. But we win looking like we're losing as we walk the way of Christ, which is the way of service. Why do we do this? Do we do it because it always works? No, we do it because that's what Jesus did. We do it because that's what God's like. We do it because this is our big story. Why do we turn the other cheek? Do we turn the other cheek because we won't get slapped? Sometimes we will get slapped. We do it not because it always works automatically. We do it because this is what God's like and this is our big story. Why do we walk an extra mile? Because God's like that. Why do we wash people's feet? Because God's like that. And we have a choice of either living in tune with our big story or out of sorts, actually with the whole universe, if we believe that this is right. Last quote. Jesus was asked to sum up the law. You know, the Old Testament. He said, you sum it up in this way. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind. Quote from Deuteronomy chapter 6. Read it the other day. And a passage from Leviticus. And love your neighbour as yourself. And he drew these two great principles together. Love God and love your neighbour as yourself. And I'm just my own paraphrase of Jesus there. Love God, love others as you love yourself. That's it. People sometimes say, yeah, but we've got to go preach the gospel. That's true. But what is the gospel? Jesus said, go into all the world and make this known. Preach the gospel, this good news. Baptize people and teach them everything that I taught you. What did Jesus teach us? To love God, love others the way we love ourselves. That's it. The two big principles that sum it all up. Lay down your life, go the extra mile, serve others. When you do it to the least of these, you'll do it to me. When you serve this child, you will see me and you will encounter me as you serve the child. That's the sum total. This is the gospel. This is the good news. This is it. Love God, love others as you love yourself. That's it. Jesus didn't say, oh, and there's a third principle. It's convert people, proselytize them, badger them, you know, ask them questions, pummel them, get them to say some prayer. Jesus said, love God, love others as you love yourself. That's it. End of story. When you do those things, you actually live this big story, which is so attractive. And to finish by going back to that then, people find their way through the crowd as they choose to, or away, and can join in at any level with no pressure anyway, because we are inclusive of people. That's what we're called to be. It's time for some questions and answers. Thank you. Oh, is someone going to lead this?
What about we put them up on top of the table on chairs? I'm just conscious that people need to be able to see you.
Yeah.
Let's make a plan, shall we?
Yeah. Great.
That was helpful.
Didn't work.
Can I trouble you guys to come this side because of the microphone? Okay, free for all. Conversation, and anybody and everyone is open to have a question. So please, if you'd like to, just speak loudly, raise the question, and I'll pass the microphone that way. I'm not going to bring the microphone to you. Karen.
Just in the area of inclusion, you say that we want, just by the very act of including people, you're excluding